The slap echoed through first class like a firecracker. Passengers turned, startled. Then, just as quickly, they looked away. 4-year-old Chloe Voss stood frozen, one hand still in midair where it had been reaching for her drawing. Her cheek was red. Her wide gray-blue eyes stared up at the tall woman in navy, who now stood stiffly with crossed arms and no regret. "She doesn't belong here," the woman muttered. "VIP ticket or not, she doesn't belong." No one said anything. No one even moved. Telltales brings you this quiet war in the sky. Tell us where you're watching from. 12 minutes earlier, the glass roof of Zurich International glowed in warm gold as the early morning sun spilled across polished floors. Travelers bustled around Gate 24, but inside the premium boarding lane marked first class, there was quiet order. Leather briefcases, black heels, pressed coats. And Chloe. She was barely 3 feet tall in her little powder blue dress, holding a rolled sketch pad tight against her chest. A soft green bracelet blinked gently on her right wrist. Her curls bounced when she walked, and her big eyes scanned everything around her like she was collecting the world in pieces. Behind her, Mathilde, the woman who had cared for Chloe since she was a baby, smiled as she handed their passports to the gate agent. "Zurich to Toronto, first class, passenger Chloe Voss, and accompanying guardian." The agent gave a polite nod. "You're all set. Enjoy your flight." As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Chloe tilted her head, adjusting the tiny beige hearing aid behind her ear. She didn't talk much. Her father called her a silent storm, but she knew this flight was important. She wasn't just flying to visit her dad, she was delivering him something. The sketch pad in her hand held a crayon drawing of a plane with big wings and yellow stars around it. Underneath, in scribbled block letters, she had written, "To Daddy, this is you in the sky." Inside the cabin, everything shimmered in quiet elegance. The first-class suites had curved leather walls, personal lighting, pillows folded just so. Chloe's seat, 2A, looked like a soft cloud. She stepped toward it, clutching the drawing tight, and climbed into the seat. That was when the air shifted. A woman appeared in the aisle, tall and sharp-featured, with a pristine navy blazer and a name tag that read, Helena. She didn't smile. She didn't ask questions. Her gaze scanned Chloe, then flicked to Mathilde. "She's 4. Mathilde nodded calmly. "Yes, she's listed as a VIP child exception, authorized for first class by the airline. She has hearing loss, so she uses a sensory bracelet. We have rules," Helena cut in, voice flat. "No passengers under 6 in first. It's disruptive to our service model." Chloe looked up confused. She wasn't being disruptive. She hadn't even spoken. Mathilde kept her voice steady. "We submitted the medical authorization weeks ago. Her father cleared it directly with your corporate team." Helena's jaw tightened. "Well, I wasn't informed. You'll need to move her to business." Chloe reached for the side table and carefully placed her sketch pad there. She took out a blue crayon, the one her dad said reminded him of sky over Switzerland. She didn't hear all the words, but she saw faces tense, and she knew she wasn't wanted here. She reached up and tapped her green bracelet once, just like she was taught to do when she felt unsafe. It wasn't a cry for help, it was just a whisper. "I don't feel right." "Miss," Mathilde tried again, "I think you're misunderstanding the situation." That's when Helena stepped forward, snatched the sketch pad from the table, and said, low but firm, "You don't belong in this seat." And then came the slap. Quick, loud, sharp, open hand straight across Chloe's left cheek. The cabin gasped, but only for a second. Then silence fell, heavier than before. Mathilde lunged forward. "Excuse me?" Helena didn't flinch. She ignored direct instructions. She interfered with service protocol. "She's 4!" Mathilde snapped, shielding Chloe's small frame with her own. Chloe didn't cry. Not yet. She bent down and picked up the fallen sketch pad. One of the pages was crumpled. The corner was torn. She looked at the red mark forming on her cheek. Then she sat down slowly, curling into the side of the suite. Minutes later, Chloe was moved to business class. No one helped. No one protested. A man in 1C adjusted his cufflinks and looked out the window. A woman across the aisle raised her magazine higher to block the view. In 5D, Chloe now sat with her legs tucked under her, sketchpad on her lap like a wounded animal. Mathilde offered her water. Chloe shook her head. "She hurt me," Chloe whispered, barely audible through her tiny voice processor. "But I didn't do anything wrong." Mathilde knelt beside her, brushing curls from her face. "You didn't, sweet pea. You did everything right. I promise. I just wanted to draw Daddy." Her voice cracked, and finally, the first tear fell. Mathilde wrapped the blanket tighter around her and kissed the top of her head. Back in first class, Helena stood behind the curtain, arms folded, lips tight. She had no idea that across the Atlantic, in a quiet office in Geneva, a dashboard had just lit up red, and the name blinking on the alert? Chloe Voss, registered passenger, first class ethics alert level 3, escalated triggered by behavioral trauma response from child wearable. And somewhere, at that very moment, Elliot Voss, her father, looked up from his desk and paused. Geneva was quiet that morning. Inside a high-rise near the edge of the lake, the office of Elliot Voss felt like a glass box floating above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a shimmer of early sunlight on water, and on the polished white desk sat just two things: a warm cup of espresso and a live ethics monitoring dashboard. Elliot was midway through a Zoom call with the FAA when it happened. The dashboard blinked red. He glanced at it. The ping wasn't a usual system-wide flag. It was personal, labeled in green text across the top. Passenger, Chloe Voss, flight, North Blue, ZR340 alert type, child ethics escalation, level 3. Source, AI wearable, triggered by behavioral trauma response. His hand froze on the coffee mug. The man on the other side of the Zoom call kept talking, something about pre-certification models for 2026. But Elliot no longer heard it. The system had never flagged Chloe before. Never. He tapped the alert. Immediately, a recorded snippet played. A quiet, distorted audio feed from her bracelet. "You don't belong here." Then, a sharp sound. A slap. Followed by the soft, heartbreaking voice of his daughter. "I just wanted to draw Daddy." Elliot inhaled slowly. It wasn't anger that settled in his chest. Not yet. It was something colder, more precise. A kind of silence that only came before you decided what kind of man you were going to be in the next 5 minutes. He clicked off the Zoom call. Across the Atlantic, 38,000 feet in the air, Chloe sat curled in her seat in business class. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. The first officer had come down the aisle once, chatting with a crew member, but didn't look at her. The other passengers were back to scrolling through their devices, sipping espresso, murmuring low conversations as if nothing had happened. But Chloe's world had shrunk to two things: the torn corner of her drawing and the way the cabin lights felt too bright now. Mathilde sat beside her, trying to keep it together. She hadn't told Chloe yet what she'd seen in the flight manifest. She didn't want to scare her, but a few rows back, she'd overheard Helena whispering to another flight attendant. "She had some kind of bracelet. She tapped it. So what? I'll log her as a behavior risk." Mathilde's jaw had tightened. She wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she placed her hand gently over Chloe's and whispered, "I'm right here." Back in Geneva, Elliot stood alone in front of his private server interface. This wasn't a media move. He didn't care about press releases or damage control. This wasn't about optics. It was about one thing. Every system he had ever built was being tested right now on the person he loved most. He entered his personal access credentials. A new interface loaded. AI Ethica Gateway, Executive Override Panel. He selected the airline group, North Blue. Then the hub network, Sky Region North Consortium, 3 partner airlines, 14 major airports. He hovered over the final control. Enact emergency downgrade. All PAA-affiliated airports will revoke non-compliant privileges within 6 hours. He clicked. A confirmation code flashed. He entered it, then typed one line into the notes section. Child dignity violation. Triggered internally by ethics-linked wearable. Verified. And then he pressed enter. Onboard flight ZR340, the seatback screens flickered. Movies stopped. Flight maps vanished. Instead, a white screen appeared with 5 words in bold Helvetica font. Ethics breach. Alert level triggered. Passengers glanced up, confused. A ripple moved through the cabin. In first class, Helena froze mid-step. In business, a man looked at his screen, frowned, then looked toward the front. Chloe sat up straighter, blinking at her screen. She didn't understand the words, but something inside her stirred. Mathilde read the screen and whispered, "Oh, your dad got it." Helena appeared at the curtain edge. "Why are the screens frozen?" She snapped at another crew member. I don't know," the woman stammered. Then the intercom clicked on. A voice, clear, calm, unmistakably American, spoke, not from the flight deck, but from somewhere above all of this. "This is Elliot Voss, Executive Director of the Air Ethica Gateway Program. To the crew member involved in the violation of a child's dignity on this flight, your actions have been recorded, logged, and escalated. All partner airports within Sky Region North will suspend VIP operations for your carrier effective immediately. This is not a punishment. This is a correction." The cabin went completely still. Helena took a single step backward. Passengers whispered. One woman gasped audibly. A man in a business suit reached for his tablet and checked the North Blue stock app. It was already down 6%. Back in business class, Chloe looked up at Mathilde. "Was that Daddy?" Mathilde nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, baby, that was him." Chloe's lip trembled. Then, for the first time since she was hit, she smiled. In first class, Helena tried to compose herself. She turned on her heel, walking stiffly to the galley, but the whispers followed her. A young man seated in 1D whispered to his wife, "Did she really hit that kid?" "I saw her," someone else said. "She slapped her. She ripped something out of her hands." Helena paused behind the curtain, her hand gripping the edge of the cart, knuckles white. This was supposed to be a standard flight. Routine, no chaos. And now every monitor on board was showing an ethics alert tied to her name. Down in Geneva, Elliot sat back, fingers folded in front of his mouth. The alert would now cascade across 14 major airports. 3 partner airlines would receive automated compliance downgrades, and $820 million in ESG-tied funding, all linked to active Air Ethica scores, would freeze pending ethical reassessment. He hadn't spoken to the media. He hadn't posted anything. But inside the walls of the aviation industry, a storm had just begun. And it had started with the smallest person on that plane. Back in the sky, Chloe looked out the window. Below them, the Atlantic shimmered like glass. She pressed her fingers gently to the bracelet. It pulsed warm now, slow, steady, safe. And for the first time since boarding, she whispered something to herself. "I belong here." Helena stood frozen in the galley, staring at the closed curtain like it might buy her time. The words still rang in her head. "This is not a punishment. This is a correction." Passengers had heard it. The crew had heard it. And worst of all, she had heard it, not as a warning, but as a sentence. She pulled out her tablet and tapped into the crew system. There it was, a full system ethics lockout. Her access to cabin controls, restricted. Flight announcements, blocked. All screens now cycled between the same 3 notices. Passenger ethics alert active. Crew ethics violation recorded. Gateway suspension in progress. It was like someone had taken over the flight from the sky. In business class, Chloe still sat quietly, but the mood around her had changed. People were whispering. Passengers who had ignored her earlier were now glancing over, curious. Some were remorseful, others simply afraid of being associated with the wrong side of the situation. Mathilde leaned over. "They're all starting to realize." Chloe didn't speak, but she gave a small nod, like she understood something beyond her years. She held the drawing tighter now, folding the torn edge carefully and tracing her name with her finger. Just across the aisle, a flight attendant named Denise approached, bending down. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. "Would you like some juice? Apple or orange?" Chloe looked at her, unsure. This was the first soft voice she'd heard from a uniformed person in hours. Mathilde stepped in. "She'll take orange, please. Thank you." Denise smiled and walked off, but not before casting a pointed glance toward the front of the cabin. Everyone knew who the message from Geneva had been aimed at, and everyone knew who had caused it. In first class, a ripple of anxiety passed through the passengers. Phones buzzed as Wi-Fi briefly returned, just long enough for news to trickle in. A headline popped up on one man's screen. 820 Malum Ethics Freeze Hits North Blue. After alleged mistreatment of deaf child, passenger's father linked to FAA program. A woman gasped softly. "Wait, she's his daughter?" Another man looked up. "The guy who created Air Ethica?" Helena heard all of it from behind the curtain. She fumbled to open her crew comm device and called Lead Operations Control. It rang. Once, twice, then connected. "Ops, go ahead." "This is Helena Kraft, Flight ZR340. We have a situation." The voice on the other end was calm, but clipped. "We're aware." She blinked. "Then you know I need to explain." There was silence. Then, "Helena, stand by." "What do you mean, stand by? I need—" Click. The line went dead. Her stomach dropped. She tried to call again. Blocked. Then her screen flashed. Access level downgraded. Crew flagged for ethics review. She swore under her breath and leaned against the wall. Her hands were shaking. This wasn't just a suspension coming. This was a blacklist. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, rumors spread like wildfire. "She's the one who hit that kid," someone said. "No way. They wouldn't let her keep working." "But did you hear the announcement? That wasn't the captain. That was some ethics exec. He shut the whole plane down." "I saw the girl. She didn't do anything." People started recording, quietly, discreetly, and one brave woman in row 16 whispered, "If no one else is going to say it, I will." She pressed the call button. Back in business class, a different flight attendant, Andrew, younger, clearly uncomfortable, walked up to Mathilde. "Excuse me," he said softly, "but would it be all right if I asked Chloe a quick question?" Mathilde hesitated. "What kind of question?" Andrew knelt down, eye level with Chloe. "I just wanted to ask, do you feel safe now?" Chloe blinked. Then slowly, she nodded. Andrew smiled, visibly relieved. "I'm sorry," he added. "We all are." Mathilde watched him walk away, a little stunned. The crew was changing, and they knew it had nothing to do with policy. It had everything to do with what they had allowed. Until now. In the cockpit, the captain finally got a direct message from ground control. It was brief. "Ethics gateway active. Continue flight path. FAA override confirmed. Final report expected on arrival. All crew subject to review. Record passenger conditions. Do not interfere." He looked at his co-pilot, then back at the message. "Looks like we're just flying the plane today," he muttered. In first class, Helena tried to pull herself together. She wasn't just afraid for her job. She was afraid of what came next. Because if this little girl had triggered a suspension like this, it meant her father had direct access to infrastructure that could destroy more than just her career. She knew North Blue had been reliant on ESG-backed funding for months. Their Air Ethica scores were publicly posted. A single downgrade meant they could lose contracts, code share deals, and investor confidence. And now, the ethics score was marked as non-compliant. She opened the cabin curtain slowly, peering out. A man in 2B gave her a death stare. Another woman whispered and turned away. Even in first class, silence now had a sharp edge. At the back of the plane, 2 junior crew members had quietly activated the incident protocol log. They didn't want to be caught up in this fallout. One typed a report into the internal system. Child passenger struck by Helena Craft, cabin 2A, witnessed by Matilde, guardian, and 3 other passengers. Incident recorded post-flight via wearable data. Recommendation: full investigation. Crew morale impacted. Passenger trust compromised. They hit send, then sat back, hands shaking. Chloe stared out the window again. The clouds looked like giant pillows floating just beneath them. She didn't know what words like ethics suspension or corporate funding freeze meant. But she knew something had shifted. People were being careful around her now, kind, soft. Like they finally understood what she had been trying to say, even without saying anything. And in that moment, curled in her seat with her drawing in her lap and her bracelet glowing gently, she finally whispered something to Matilde. "Daddy heard me." Matilda smiled through the tears. "Yes, baby, he really did." The phone didn't ring. It screamed. Inside the control tower at North Blue's Global Ops HQ in Frankfurt, everything had gone sideways. One moment, they were watching a routine long-haul flight across the Atlantic. The next, they were staring at a live feed dashboard flashing Ethics Override, Authority, Voss, Air Ethica Gateway. Then came the second blow. An emergency notification from the FAA, stamped and authenticated, stating that 3 partner airlines, North Blue, Sky Euro, and Aerolance, had been officially marked non-compliant under the Passenger Adaptability Architecture Protocol. Which meant one thing: every single VIP terminal at 14 airports was being shut down for those airlines. Flights rerouted, gates reassigned, investor lines lit up like wildfire. In the center of it all, Elizabeth Hauser, CEO of North Blue, stood staring at the live dashboard, her lips drawn tight. "Is this confirmed?" she asked flatly. The director of compliance, sweating visibly, nodded. "It's Voss. He signed it with level 7 clearance. FAA didn't even blink. They're following his lead." Another exec chimed in. "This was triggered by a 4-year-old child in business class. She was hit by Helena Craft. That child is—" "I know who she is," Elizabeth cut him off. She paced once across the room, then stopped. "Prepare a holding statement," she said coldly. "And get me someone from Air Ethica, now." Back on flight ZR340, Helena sat alone in the front galley. No one would look at her, not the crew, not the captain, and certainly not the passengers. She'd tried calling her union rep. No response. She'd tried messaging corporate. Blocked. Even her personal messages weren't going through. Someone had firewalled her entire comm ID. It felt like the plane was flying, without her on it, as if she didn't exist anymore. In business class, Chloe was sketching again, this time slower, focused. The new drawing was different. It wasn't just colors and clouds. It had shape, intent. In the center was a little girl with long brown hair and a soft blue bracelet on her wrist. Around her were faces, some sad, some scared, some just starting to smile again. And beneath it, in big wobbly letters, "I'm still here." Matilde watched her, heart swelling. From the seat behind them, a quiet voice spoke. "She's stronger than all of us, you know." Matilde turned to see a man in a charcoal suit. He gave a soft nod. "I'm a journalist," he whispered. "Don't worry, I'm not filming. I was on this flight by chance, and I saw what she did." Matilde said nothing, but Chloe looked up. Her eyes met the man's, and slowly, deliberately, she nodded. In Geneva, Elliot stood by the window of his office, now dimly lit by late afternoon sun. His phone buzzed. Not his public line, not his office line, his red line. He picked it up. "Elizabeth," he said. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Elliot, you made your point. But grounding 3 airlines? No, Elliot replied evenly. The system grounded them. I just refused to override it. A pause. You realize what this costs us. Our ESG ratings, our airport contracts. I realize what it almost cost my daughter, he said. The line went quiet. Elliot continued, calm but razor sharp. She was hit, humiliated. For what? Having a hearing aid? For not answering fast enough? And no one stopped it. No one spoke. Not until her bracelet did. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. What do you want? Accountability, he said. Public and lasting. Another pause. Then, she'll be fired. Too late. The flight isn't over and she's already been erased from your crew network. This isn't about one woman anymore. This is about your whole operating ethic. He hung up. By the time Flight ZR-340 began its descent into JFK, the news had broken wide. Screens at the airport flashed, breaking. Airline exec's daughter slapped mid-flight. Ethics Gateway freezes 820 millionaires in operations. She just wanted to draw for her dad. Witness says FAA confirms investigation underway. Airlines face backlash. Chloe didn't know any of that. She was busy packing up her sketchbook. Andrew, the same attendant who'd apologized earlier, approached her gently. Hey, sweetheart, he said, kneeling down. Would you mind if we hung your picture up in the crew cabin, just for us to remember what matters? Chloe blinked, then nodded. Mathilde handed it over. Andrew took the drawing like it was a sacred thing, then stood and walked back, passing Helena without a word. In first class, no one looked up as Helena gathered her things. No announcement came for her. No thank you for your service. No gate escort. Nothing. She would be met by security. That much she knew. And even if no one had said the words yet, she could feel it. Her career was over. Not because of one slap, but because the world had finally decided that children like Chloe mattered more than crew rank or seniority or status. And in this new world, people were watching. As the plane touched down, Chloe leaned against the window. She could see the lights of the airport. Ground vehicles zipped by. A new terminal blinked softly in the distance, one of the ones Elliot had helped design. For the first time since she boarded, her bracelet pulsed green 3 times. Safe, secure, heard. And without saying a word. Chloe smiled. The moment Flight ZR-340 taxied to the gate at JFK, it was already too late for the airline to control the narrative. On the ground, 3 news vans lined the terminal windows. Dozens of passengers inside pointed phones toward the tarmac. One teenage girl even whispered, "That's the flight. That's the one." Inside the aircraft, passengers unbuckled slowly. No one stood immediately. No one clapped. Instead, a thick, uneasy silence filled the cabin. Like everyone knew they had just witnessed something too big for social media to summarize. Chloe stayed in her seat, quietly hugging her backpack. Mathilde leaned in and whispered, "Your dad's waiting, honey. Let's go meet him, okay?" Chloe nodded, a little unsure. Andrew appeared beside them. "We've cleared a private exit. We'll walk you through." They moved gently through the cabin. This time, no one stared at them with confusion. Only quiet awe. One older woman even said softly, "Bless her." Another passenger gave Mathilde a look of apology. Not forced, but sincere. For the first time in hours, Chloe felt what it was like to move through the world without resistance. At the gate, 2 agents in dark suits waited by a discreet side entrance. They weren't police, but they wore the unmistakable earpieces of federal compliance escorts. "Ms. Renault, this way, please." Mathilde held Chloe's hand as they were whisked down a private corridor, bypassing the chaos erupting in the public terminal. Just behind them, Helena Kraft stepped off the plane. There were no agents waiting for her. Only a man in a gray suit holding a printed envelope. "Ms. Kraft," he said flatly, handing it to her. She opened it. Immediate termination. Pending ethics review. Crew ID suspended. All privileges revoked. No eye contact, no explanation. She looked around. No cameras. No one defending her. Even the gate crew avoided her gaze. It was like the entire airport had silently decided, "You don't belong here anymore." Outside Terminal 5, 3 black SUVs waited in a reserved lane. The middle one opened. Inside was Elliot Voss. He stepped out the moment he saw his daughter. No security could stop him from crossing that last 10 feet. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. Chloe looked up, then ran into his arms. He knelt, scooping her up gently, holding her close. He didn't ask if she was okay. He already knew the answer, because her bracelet had told him everything. But what mattered was that she was here, whole, unbroken. And when she whispered in his ear, "I finished the drawing," he almost cried. Later that day, in a packed media room on the 38th floor of Voss Integrum HQ, the world got its first official statement. Elliot stood behind a single microphone. No branding, no flag, no corporate backdrop. Just a white screen and 5 words. "Children should never fear flying." He began, voice calm and direct. "My daughter was hit mid-flight. She has a hearing impairment. She did nothing wrong." A pause. She was struck, ignored, and misjudged by someone entrusted with protecting passengers. But this isn't about one flight attendant. It's about an industry that keeps allowing this to happen. He looked up, straight into the cameras. "So we've built a way to stop it." He clicked a remote. Behind him, the screen changed. Echo Protocol Ethics Compliance Handoff Optimization for every airline, every route, every cabin. Elliot continued. "Starting next month, every airport with FAA contracts must integrate live passenger sentiment detection tied to crew behavior feedback. We're not using facial scans. We're not using biometrics." He gestured to Chloe's bracelet. "We're letting passengers speak without needing to raise their voices, especially those who can't." Reporters scribbled notes. He finished. "If your airline chooses to ignore these ethics alerts, you'll no longer receive clearance for protected international routes, and you'll lose access to ECA-backed flight insurance, because dignity isn't negotiable anymore." That night, the footage played across every major outlet. Cable news ran the headline, "The day a 4-year-old changed the sky online." People began sharing photos of Chloe's drawing. It went viral under the hashtag "I'm still here." Parents of kids with disabilities shared stories. Former crew members spoke out. Airlines scrambled to update training policies overnight, but nothing could outrun what had already landed. The silence of a child, and the voice it finally forced the world to hear. By sunrise, the world had seen her face, not because Chloe wanted them to, but because someone in row 8C, mid-flight, had captured the exact moment Helena slapped her and uploaded it 3 hours after landing. The video was only 21 seconds long. It didn't need more. It opened with Helena's hand in the air, frozen in motion. A confused Chloe, blinking, her tiny hand on her blue bracelet. Then, the strike, the stunned silence. No one said a word. Until Chloe reached for her drawing again, lips trembling. Then, the video cut. But that was enough. By 7:15 a.m. New York Times, and she didn't deserve. That was trending in 5 countries. By 8 o'clock a.m., it changed to something new. Hatch echo her. Inside a quiet apartment in Oakland, Michelle Carter, mother of a nonverbal 6-year-old boy, stared at the video. Her hands were shaking. She clicked record on her phone and whispered, "You don't know what it's like until it's your child." Watching them be misunderstood, punished for silence. She posted it with just 3 words. "I hear you, Chloe." That post alone reached 2.1 million views by noon. At a Starbucks in Minneapolis, Luis Alvarez, a retired flight attendant of 22 years, opened his laptop and typed a post on LinkedIn. "I remember a boy on my flight in 2003, hearing impaired. He wouldn't look me in the eye, so I thought he was rude. I realize now. I failed him. The system failed him. We weren't trained for compassion. We were trained for control. Chloe didn't just get slapped. She woke up an entire generation of us. His post hit 120,000 likes in 3 hours. Across Europe, in an Air Ethica policy board meeting, someone asked, "So what's next?" Elliot Voss simply replied, "We give the passengers back their eyes." Then he tapped the screen. The Echo protocol rollout would expand, not just for North Blue, but for any airline touching a US or EU federal route. They had 72 hours to sign the new Passenger Ethics Accord or face withdrawal of PAA protection. That included 1.1b in annual shared insurance risk pools, fast-track security clearances at 17 major airports, access to gate-sharing consortiums on 3 continents. On social media, parents began recording videos with their children, some verbal, some using sign language, others holding up drawings, all repeating the same message: "I'm still here." One video from Brazil showed a little girl holding up a picture of Chloe and signing, "I want to be brave like her." It had 3.4 M views by the evening. In an internal staff forum at North Blue, the crew backlash was boiling over. Someone posted, "We've all had to deal with entitled passengers, but this? She was 4. What are we even doing?" Another wrote, "They trained us to smile, not to see people." And the most upvoted comment read, "I used to think the ethics warnings were annoying. Now, I want them on every flight, because maybe next time I won't stay silent." Meanwhile, Chloe sat at a sunlit window in her dad's New York apartment. She wasn't watching the news. She was drawing again. This time, her sketch was of a plane, but it wasn't in the sky. It was on the ground, surrounded by people holding signs. Some signs said, "Listen." Some said, "Safe." One said, "Small doesn't mean invisible." She added a rainbow across the top, then paused, looked at her bracelet, and smiled. Later that evening, Elliot joined her on the floor with his laptop. He showed her a short clip. It was a girl, maybe 7 years old, in a hospital bed. She had tubes in her nose and her voice was faint, but she looked straight into the camera and said, "Thank you, Chloe. I used the same bracelet. I never thought anyone would notice it meant something." Elliot turned to his daughter. "I wanted you to know," he said softly, "that you started something." Chloe nodded, then signed back slowly, her hand unsure. "Are we done yet?" Elliot smiled. "Not yet, but almost." The next morning, major outlets ran the headlines. Echo protocol signed by 12 airlines. Chloe Voss becomes face of ethical air travel. Passenger Ethics Accord to become global standard by fall. 4-year-old girl sparks billion-dollar industry shift without saying a word. Chloe didn't understand all of it, but she felt it. At the grocery store, someone whispered to Mathilde, "That's her, isn't it?" At a cafe, the barista wrote, "For Chloe, you're seen," on the cup. At school, her classmates made her a card that simply said, "We'll listen now." And in quiet corners of the industry, places where power usually hides, change began whispering. Training manuals were rewritten. Cabin protocols revised. Crew feedback systems restructured. All because a little girl didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just pressed a bracelet and kept coloring. And that was enough to bring down the silence. Inside the 31st floor of North Blue's global headquarters, the air felt heavy. The kind of heavy that didn't come from weather, but from the kind of panic that hits when power realizes it's no longer invisible. Elizabeth Hauser, CEO of North Blue, stood at the center of the boardroom. A half-dozen executives surrounded her, some pacing, others glued to their screens. 2 men were arguing. "She's 4 years old," one snapped. "And she just tanked our ethics score on 4 international indexes." "Because we let it happen," another said. "You can't spin your way out of hitting a child with a disability." It was a misunderstanding. It was a slap, Patrick. On the screen behind them, the dashboard flashed. North Blue ethics score, D, non-compliant. FAA clearance risk, high ESG partner withdrawals, 400 voix. Then came the real blow. A private email was leaked. An internal staff memo from 3 years ago. The subject line read, "Passengers with disabilities, Tips for discretion. It was bad. Lines like, avoid over-accommodating to the point of disrupting premium passengers. Redirect if passengers exhibit signs of sensory confusion. If child behavior is disruptive, discreet escalation is permitted. The memo hit X, formerly Twitter, at 10:23 a.m. By 10:41, discreet escalation was trending. By 11:12, 6 disability rights groups had announced a joint legal petition. Inside her office, Elizabeth stared at the screen. She didn't speak, because she couldn't deny it anymore. North Blue wasn't just in trouble. It was collapsing morally, and not because of a hostile act, but because a little girl never screamed. She just sat there, hurt, and let the world realize what it had become. Meanwhile, across town, Chloe sat on her dad's lap at the window of their temporary apartment. She was coloring again. This time, she drew a plane. Not flying, not crashing. Just still, like it had stopped to breathe. Underneath, she wrote the words, "Now they hear." Her bracelet blinked once. New update received. Elliot looked at his laptop. The Air Ethica engineers had sent a mock-up. At the top of the new interface, "Welcome to the Chloe Protocol." Back at North Blue HQ, chaos turned to fracture. A new voice entered the boardroom, this time from a speakerphone in Zurich. It was Martin Keller, a silent partner investor. "We've reviewed the current ethics liability exposure," he said coolly. "We'll be divesting $180 billion unless the company signs the Passenger Ethics Accord by Friday." Someone in the room snapped, "That's blackmail." "No," Keller said. "It's a reckoning. You don't hit children and call it discretion." Elizabeth finally spoke. "Understood," she said. Click. The call ended, and just like that, they lost control of the narrative. Elsewhere in Geneva, a journalist was interviewing Chloe's school teacher. "She never made a fuss," the teacher said. "Never shouted for attention." The reporter nodded. "And yet she changed federal air travel." The teacher smiled. "She didn't need to scream. The silence did all the work." By late afternoon, the FAA issued an updated advisory. All U.S.-linked carriers must initiate pre-screening ethics systems for nonverbal and disabled passengers. Implementation deadline, 120 days. Primary compliance model, Chloe Protocol. That same day, 3 major airlines, Skywind, Aerovista, and PolarJet, voluntarily adopted the system. And in an unexpected turn, Delta Atlantic issued a public statement. "We failed passengers like Chloe, but we won't stay silent anymore. Starting now, all crew will undergo empathy protocol training, led by survivors, not consultants." The statement went viral. Inside her temporary room, Chloe watched her dad read a letter from the FAA. She tilted her head. "Is it over?" she signed. Elliot smiled, his eyes a little wet. "It's starting." The next morning, a clip surfaced. A North Blue flight attendant stood outside the airline's HQ, holding a sign. "I was trained to escalate. Now I want to learn to listen." Passengers began posting their own signs. "I miss the signs. Never again. If you hear her, you hear all of us. Silence was never permission." In the world of aviation, known for rules, codes, silence, and status, something cracked wide open. A 4-year-old girl didn't yell, didn't protest, didn't speak. But her silence carried a weight no speech could match. She became the mirror. And when people looked, they saw who they'd become. And finally asked the question, what do we do when we're the ones who stop listening? The sky over Geneva was gray, but it didn't rain. Inside the United Nations Conference Hall, the air buzzed with anticipation. Delegates, press, ethics officers, and CEOs filled the seats. For once, they weren't there to talk about war, oil, or tech monopolies. They were there because a 4-year-old girl got slapped on a plane, and the world finally decided to listen. On the massive screen above the stage, her name appeared in 17 languages. Chloe Protocol Ratification Ceremony. A simple sentence, but to many, It was the moment aviation caught up with human decency. Behind the curtain, Chloe stood in her father's arms. She wore a small cream dress with silver buttons and navy sneakers. No makeup, no crown. Just her blue Echo bracelet flashing gently. A female staffer leaned in, whispering to Elliot, "She's ready?" He nodded. Then to Chloe, signing slowly, "You don't have to say anything. Just stand with me." Chloe signed back with a smile. "Okay, but can I draw first?" He laughed softly. "Of course." She pulled out her little notepad and began sketching. No one saw what she drew yet. The crowd stood when the General Secretary of the ICAO stepped onto the stage. She was calm, powerful, and didn't waste words. "Today we mark the formal adoption of the Chloe Protocol across 31 national aviation networks," she said. "For decades we built systems that moved people, but we forgot how to protect them." She paused. "We forgot that silence is not absence, that stillness is not weakness, that small doesn't mean unseen." Then she turned. "And today, we remember." She gestured toward the curtain, and Chloe stepped onto the stage. Flashbulbs popped, but Chloe didn't flinch. She just held her father's hand, blinking at the lights. Then Elliot knelt beside her and whispered, "Do you want to show them your picture?" Chloe nodded. She turned the notepad around. It was a drawing of a plane, but this time it wasn't sitting still. It was in the air, high, safe, with clouds around it, and written underneath in her shaky handwriting, "Now I can fly too." The applause didn't come all at once. It started softly from one side of the room, then grew. Not thunderous, not performative, but honest. Some delegates stood. Others simply wiped their eyes. Chloe didn't bow. She didn't wave. She just looked out, blinked once, then leaned over and hugged her dad's leg. And somehow, that said more than any speech could have delivered. Later, in the press room, a reporter asked Elliot, "What made you build the ecosystem in the first place?" Elliot didn't hesitate. "I was tired of watching people like my daughter be told they were difficult or invisible or disruptive. She didn't need to change. The world did." Another reporter raised their hand. "What does Chloe think of all this?" Elliot smiled. "She thinks it's a lot of adults learning how to listen." The room chuckled, but everyone knew it was true. Meanwhile, outside the Geneva Hall, something remarkable was happening. Families gathered in the plaza, holding up handmade drawings. Flight crew from over 22 airlines wore pins that said, "Chloe sees me." One child held up a sign that read, "I'm learning to hear, thanks to her." It didn't need translation. The message had already become universal. That evening, Chloe was scheduled to receive a Global Ethics Honor Medal presented by the World Aviation Council. But when the time came and the announcer called her name, Chloe didn't walk up. Instead, she looked at her bracelet, then at her dad, and shook her head. Elliot leaned in, confused. Chloe whispered something into his ear. His face softened. Then he walked to the microphone himself. "My daughter would like to decline the medal," he said gently. "She asked if she could give it to someone else." The audience murmured. "She'd like to give it to the little girl who first told her it's okay to wear the bracelet in public. Her classmate, Ella." From the side aisle, a red-headed girl stood stunned. The crowd turned to her. She didn't know what to do. She stepped forward slowly. Chloe met her halfway and placed the medal in her hands. Then the two hugged quietly. No cameras, no speech. Just a thank you that needed no words. Across newsrooms that night, the story exploded again, not because of policy, but because the world had just seen something it hadn't in a long time. Grace. Real, small, undeniable grace. In New York, a grandmother watching the clip said to her daughter, "She's teaching us better than the schools ever did." In Tokyo, a university ethics professor paused his lecture and played the video instead. In Nairobi, a father added a rule to his home: "We speak like Chloe listens." And across the globe, airline stock tickers adjusted. Not because of market fear, but because ethics compliance became a premium value driver. The Chloe protocol wasn't just good morals. It was smart business. Back in their hotel room, Elliot tucked Chloe into bed. She was tired, not overwhelmed, just naturally exhausted from being seen all day. He kissed her forehead. "You did something big," he said. She whispered, "Can we go home now?" He nodded. "Yes, Bug, we're going home." She rolled over. "Can I fly next to the window again?" "Absolutely." The next morning, Chloe woke up to sunlight spilling into the room and the soft sounds of a city she no longer had to fear. No news alerts. No cameras. Just breakfast, a walk, and eventually a plane ride home. She put on her shoes, slipped on her bracelet, then took out her new sketch pad and started a fresh page. She drew herself in a plane seat, next to the window, with headphones, and this time smiling. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Just me, flying." The jet touched down at JFK just before 5 p.m. For the first time in weeks, there was no press, no security escort, no photographers waiting by the jet bridge. Just Elliot, Chloe, and Mathilde walking quietly toward the arrivals gate like any other family. It was almost peaceful. Almost. Inside the terminal, a North Blue gate agent named Ronnie Chase leaned over to a junior attendant. "That's the girl, isn't it?" he whispered, nodding toward Chloe. "The one from Geneva?" The younger attendant squinted. "She looks smaller in person." Ronnie crossed his arms. "Shouldn't be flying without a clearance badge. That bracelet means nothing unless she's got special paperwork. She's the reason we have the bracelet program." The junior muttered. Ronnie didn't care. At the domestic transfer gate, Chloe stepped forward with her boarding pass and held up her wrist, the familiar blue Echo bracelet blinking. Ronnie scanned the bracelet, then frowned. "This isn't registering," he said flatly. Elliot, still catching up from behind, heard the tone before the words. "Excuse me?" he asked, stepping forward. "That's a Chloe protocol badge. It's been cleared at every terminal in Europe." "Yeah, well," Ronnie said with a shrug. "You're in New York now. Different rules." Elliot blinked. "I designed those rules." Ronnie chuckled without looking up. "Then you should have made them more compatible." He held up his hand to Chloe. "Sorry, sweetheart. Can't let you through. Try standby." Chloe stood there, eyes wide, staring at her dad. She didn't cry. She didn't pout. She just took a step back, quietly, like she'd done something wrong. And that cut deeper than any tantrum ever could. Elliot took a breath. One long, slow breath. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his ID badge, the one with federal clearance level Echo 9. He flipped it open in Ronnie's face. "This gives me access to any biometric stream in this airport." Ronnie hesitated. Elliot leaned in, voice low, controlled. "If you don't let my daughter board, I will override this gate, flag your employee compliance record, and freeze this terminal's ethics clearance for 48 hours. Ronnie stepped back. But Chloe had already turned away. She no longer wanted to board. 30 minutes later, in the FAA conference hall on 8th Avenue, Elliot stood before a room full of agency heads, tech contractors, and 2 U.S. senators. On the screen behind him, the Echo Protocol rollout dashboard, showing green lights across 63 airports, all except one. JFK Terminal 3, Red Elliot didn't smile. "This isn't about code," he said. "It's about will. The protocol works, but the people don't." Someone from the FAA asked, "What happened just now?" Elliot stared for a beat. "My daughter was just turned away in the airport that launched this program." A murmur rippled across the room. He added quietly, "She didn't flinch. She didn't complain. But she won't forget it." Back in their apartment that night, Chloe was in her room, sitting on the floor, tracing circles on her bracelet. Mathilde walked in and sat beside her. "You okay?" she asked softly. Chloe nodded, then signed slowly. "I thought they would remember." Mathilde bit her lip. "They will, or they'll learn. Again." But the next day, the story changed. Not from the FAA, but from a hidden network of voices online, ones that had been waiting to strike. A right-wing lobby group called Wings First posted a video, how one 4-year-old took down airline freedom and what it'll cost you. It featured clips of Chloe's Geneva ceremony, overlaid with warnings about overregulation, corporate cowardice, and the silent takeover of premium space. The video racked up 4 million views in 24 hours, and the comments were ugly. Keep your brat at home. Airplanes aren't therapy rooms. She's 4. She doesn't need a protocol. She needs parenting. Some even posted images of burning bracelets. One account doxed Elliot's home address. At North Blue's ethics division, a new debate exploded. Should the Chloe protocol remain mandatory or be opt-in only? Some executives pushed back. This is a PR overcorrection, one said. We're losing elite loyalty passengers over a toddler. She's not a toddler, another fired back. She's the face of everything we got wrong. Silence. Then the V of legal ethics, Martha Cheng, stood up and said, if we abandon this now, we prove every lawsuit right, and we tell millions of nonverbal passengers that they're a burden. The room went quiet again. No vote was taken, but lines were drawn. Meanwhile, at home, Chloe drew again. This time the picture was of a plane, but there was a fence in front of it. And on the other side of the fence, just her, sitting alone. Underneath she wrote, "Not this time." Later that week, the FAA called Elliot with urgent news. There was a motion in Congress, hidden inside a transportation funding bill, that would strip federal enforcement of ethics compliance in airports. If passed, the Chloe protocol would become toothless. Elliot sat in silence, then asked, "Who sponsored the amendment?" The voice on the other line was quiet. A lobbyist from Wings First, under the name Shelby Royce. Elliot's jaw clenched. 3 hours later, he boarded a flight to DC alone. This wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about every silent passenger who had trusted the system to protect them and was about to be erased by a pen stroke. As the plane lifted off, Elliot opened his laptop and began writing. It was a letter. To the press, to the FAA, to the Senate, and to Chloe. Washington, D.C. smelled like thunder that morning. Heavy clouds hanging low over marble steps and security checkpoints. Elliot adjusted his tie. It wasn't nerves. It was purpose. He wasn't walking into a hearing as a tech CEO. He was walking in as Chloe's father, and he wasn't alone. Behind him walked 2 FAA officials, a rep from the Autism Civil Alliance, and an older man in a Navy jacket. Retired pilot Henry Calloway, who once grounded his own flight after misreading a child's distress signal. They called themselves the Listening Coalition. Inside the Senate hearing room, it was cold, intentionally so. Chairs were filled with aides, analysts, and members of the press. At the front, the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Oversight, chaired by Senator Deborah Kim, DOR, and co-chaired by Senator Lawson Griggs, RKS. Sitting at the witness table, Elliot placed the echo device in front of him. A blue bracelet, a silent child's voice, and the center of a nation's divide. Senator Griggs opened. We're here today to evaluate whether the federal government should enforce or rescind mandatory implementation of the Chloe Protocol across U.S. airports. He glanced up. Mr. Wren, do you believe your daughter's experience represents the majority of passengers? Elliot didn't blink. I don't think her experience should have to be the majority for it to matter. There was a pause. Senator Kim leaned in. And yet, it clearly did matter. The world changed because a little girl sat quietly while being hurt. Griggs scoffed. With respect, ma'am, the world overreacted. He turned to the room. We are here because a 4-year-old cried on a plane. That doesn't mean we gut aviation procedure and hand control to emotional anecdotes. That stung. Elliot didn't flinch, but the Navy pilot beside him did. Captain Calloway cleared his throat and stood. You ever been in a cockpit during turbulence, Senator? Griggs frowned. No, You ever misread a passenger's face and make the wrong call? I'm not a pilot, sir. Exactly. Calloway turned to the crowd. I've flown 3.1 million miles. I've seen panic. I've seen true medical emergencies. But I've never seen a cabin freeze the way it did when Chloe was struck. The room quieted. He held up a drive. This is a cabin feed, released under the FAA's consent archive. No audio, no manipulation. Elliot plugged it in. On screen, a still image. Chloe in her first-class seat, eyes wide. The slap just happened. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. But in the background, every other passenger? They stopped. One man dropped his drink. A woman covered her mouth. A flight attendant's smile vanished in slow motion. Then, 22 seconds of total stillness. You could see it. A hush that cracked the soul of the plane. Griggs shifted in his seat. Senator Kim whispered, "The girl didn't break the silence. She built it." Later in the hearing, a lobbyist from Wings First was called to testify. He wore an expensive watch, a smug expression, and a thin smile. This overreach will cost airlines over $840 million in retraining, implementation, and protocol recalibration, he warned. We're turning jetliners into therapy chambers. Elliot leaned into the mic. Your math's off. He clicked a slide. Airlines that implemented Chloe protocol early. Passenger satisfaction was 34%. Lawsuits related to ADA violations, 61%. Loyalty renewals, 23%. And your morality's worse, Elliot added. This isn't about therapy. It's about dignity. At 4:12 p.m., the room voted on Amendment 4104 B, the one that would have stripped the Chloe Protocol's enforcement clause. Result, 12-3. Amendment failed. Then came a shocker. Senator Griggs, the most vocal opponent, leaned forward. I may not agree with all of it, but I watched that tape, and my granddaughter wears an Echo bracelet now. He nodded. I vote yes, to protect her too. The Chloe Protocol would not only remain federal, it would become the foundation of a new ethics framework, the FAIA, Federal Aviation Integrity Act. The bill passed committee with bipartisan support. The next stop, the full Senate. But the fight had turned. The child who never spoke now had the floor, and her silence was ringing in marble halls. That night, Elliot called home. Chloe was playing with her friend Ella and drawing spaceships. When she saw her dad's face on screen, she ran up, waving her sketch pad. It said, "Did they hear?" Elliot smiled. They're still listening. 2 weeks after the vote, the U.S. Senate passed the Federal Aviation Integrity Act. It wasn't a landslide, but it was enough. 58 votes to approve, 42 against. And with that, the Chloe Protocol moved from pilot program to federal mandate. Overnight, every commercial airport in the U.S. received the rollout notice. Echo bracelets would now be recognized across all terminals. Every crew member trained. Every airline required to report non-verbal ethics compliance monthly. It was done. Chloe didn't celebrate. She didn't even know what ratified meant. To her, all that mattered was that the gate agent didn't block her anymore. That when she lifted her wrist, people nodded instead of frowned. And that now, kids like her wouldn't be told, "Say it louder," just because they chose not to speak. In Boston, Chloe sat in a quiet room at her school while her classmates read a story from their new civics textbook. The page showed a cartoon of a little girl holding up a blinking bracelet. The title read, "How Chloe Changed the Sky." One student looked at her and whispered, "That's you." Chloe smiled shyly and signed, "They made my nose too small." Everyone laughed, but the moment landed. Even the teacher wiped away a tear. A few days later, a sleek car picked Chloe and her dad up at dawn. Destination: Echo Systems headquarters, just outside Palo Alto. She had never been, but her name was on the wall. Literally. When they arrived, the CEO of Echo Inc. himself, Daniel Ishikawa, met them at the front steps. He knelt down to Chloe's level and said, "You didn't just change how we fly. You changed how we build." Then he led her inside. Echo HQ. Didn't feel like an office. It felt like a museum of silence. Soft lighting, open spaces, glass rooms with no echoes, and in the very center, a large, circular chamber with smooth white walls and no furniture, just a round table. "This is the loop," Daniel explained. "It's where the AI system was trained to understand nonverbal distress." Chloe stepped in. Her bracelet pulsed once. Then, something happened. A screen across the room blinked on. A white canvas, and a line appeared. Not typed, not clicked, drawn. A shaky blue line. Then another. 2 curves. A box, a stick, a flower. The system was drawing with her. Elliot stood frozen. "Is that her?" Daniel nodded. "We uploaded every sketch she's ever logged. Echo learned not from speech, but from emotion mapped through drawing. It responds in kind." Chloe's eyes widened. She took out her own notepad. Drew a sun. On screen, Echo added clouds. She drew a house. Echo added a tree. Then Chloe paused. She reached for a red crayon and slowly sketched a figure. Hair, dress, bracelet. A version of herself. Underneath she wrote, "Me, safe." Echo paused, then responded with 3 words. "We see you." Daniel knelt beside her. No one taught Echo that sentence. Elliot looked at him. "What do you mean?" "It built it, on its own, from fragments, based on her." Silence fell over the room. Chloe signed, then whispered, "I like this place." Daniel smiled. "You're welcome here anytime." Outside the chamber, an engineer pulled Elliot aside. He handed him a small silver case. "Prototype," he said. "We call it Echo Lux." Inside was a redesigned version of Chloe's bracelet. Thinner, sleeker, but more powerful. Chloe's model helped us cut false flag rates by 94%. Now we can detect not just distress, but patterns of exclusion. We're building predictive ethics. Elliot stared at it. "We're not trying to fix kids like Chloe," the engineer said softly. "We're fixing how we fail them." That evening, they flew home. No delays, no suspicious stares, no slaps, no questions. Just Chloe in her seat, by the window, legs crossed, watching clouds go by. She was wearing her new bracelet now. It blinked gently every time she smiled. And somewhere above 30,000 feet, a system smiled back. 6 months had passed. You wouldn't know it looking at Chloe. She was still the same. Eyes curious, hands always moving, crayons within reach. But the world around her? It wasn't the same at all. The Chloe protocol was now standard operating procedure across 142 commercial airports. Every international partner airline had signed on to the Passenger Ethics Accord. And every week, new stories came in. Passengers in wheelchairs, veterans with PTSD, nonverbal adults, all reporting one quiet thing. Someone saw me and didn't ask me to explain. The world had shifted. Not because Chloe shouted, but because she didn't have to. In their apartment in Boston, Elliot was pouring coffee when the call came. FAA Administrator Harper on the line. "We're ready," she said. Elliot blinked. "For what?" "The nameplate." He smiled. A week later, they boarded a flight to Dulles International. This time, there were no issues. The gate agent smiled at Chloe, scanned her bracelet, said gently, "Welcome back, Miss Wren." Chloe smiled. She liked this place now. The unveiling took place in Terminal C. A new wing, a new lounge. The Chloe Wren Compassion Wing. Inside, there was a wall made of glass and fiber. A living mosaic of every child, adult, and passenger who had activated Echo and been flagged for care. Their silhouettes glowed in soft blue. At the center, Chloe's silhouette, holding up a stylus. Above her, in steel letters, "We saw, we changed." Reporters asked Chloe what it meant. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. She stepped forward and tapped the screen. It blinked once, then began to draw. A house, a window, a girl, a plane. The image slowly transformed into an open gate. Everyone was watching. No one said a word. That night, as the ribbon was cut, Elliot stepped to the podium. He didn't want to give a speech. He just told a story. When Chloe was born, he said, they told us she might never speak. He looked at her. But somehow, she taught a system to listen. He held up her first bracelet, frayed, scratched, almost broken. She didn't want revenge. She wanted space. He turned to the audience. We gave her that space, and in doing so, we gave it to millions more. Applause filled the room, but Chloe was already at the window, watching a jet taxi across the runway. Months passed, and stories kept coming. One day, a mother wrote in, "My son, age 7, wears an Echo bracelet now. He used to hate flying. Now the crew greets him with his favorite color on screen." A war veteran added, "I didn't want help. I didn't even want to be seen. But that bracelet, it let me ask for dignity without saying a thing." The world hadn't become perfect, but it had learned to pause, and in that pause, dignity returned. Then came the call from Geneva, the United Nations. They wanted Chloe. A year after the slap that started it all, Chloe stood in front of the UN Assembly Hall, not to speak, but to be seen. The Secretary General introduced her simply. "This is Chloe Wren." She did not shout, protest, or plead. She simply endured. And in her silence, she revealed how much noise we were making. The room stood to applaud. Chloe didn't bow. She just smiled and drew a heart on her pad. Back home, her story became part of policy training for airlines. Every new hire watched a simulation, not of trauma, but of restraint. How to notice, how to pause, how to let someone be. And they learned the phrase now etched across thousands of gates. Echo activated. Passenger under watch. No words required. Elliot was now the director of the Ethics Integration Unit under the Department of Transportation. He still wore Chloe's bracelet on his wrist. Not for protocol, but for memory. One night, as Chloe was falling asleep, she signed to her dad, "Do you think it would have changed if I had yelled?" He thought about it, then signed back, "Maybe, but it wouldn't have changed the same way." She nodded and whispered, "Good." In the final scene of their journey, Chloe walked into an airport alone for the first time. 10 years old now, no parents, just her bag, and a bracelet that blinked when it needed to. She walked through security, was pulled aside by a new officer. He knelt down and asked gently, "You okay?" She nodded, held up her wrist. It blinked blue. The officer smiled and stepped aside. No questions, no doubt, no permission required, just respect. Chloe boarded, took her window seat, and as the plane began to taxi, she opened her notepad and began to draw. The final image, a girl in the sky. No words, just wings. Have you ever stayed quiet, but deep down, wished the world could still hear you? Tell us where you're watching from, and if Chloe's story reminded you of someone in your life.